Hello, everybody. We're back again. We're talking about, and I thought it important to address the mechanics of how these criminal cases against the former president will go forward and what's involved. Uh, even though his lawyers may have come up with this cockamamie argument as to what they could do to overturn the election, creating false sets of electors out of various states, trying to convince the governor and the secretaries of state to find mysterious votes that didn't exist. Trump, if he goes to trial, and he will, cannot claim that he relied upon these pieces of advice that he received from his attorneys unless he takes the witness stand. No one else can make the claim that I relied upon the advice of my attorneys other than the person who claims to have relied upon their advice. Now, that will be a show to see Trump get on the witness stand because he's his own worst enemy. He can't stick with a story, as we know, and a prosecutor like Jack Smith or Fannie Willis down in Georgia will eat him up. Same is true for Giuliani. I mean, we'll get to him in a little bit, but there is no way that you could tell a jury what Trump's state of mind was without it coming from him. So whatever he says he did because he thought that there was fraud or he thought there was this, he has to say it. No one else can say it for him. So it's a dangerous ploy by him to argue I relied upon the advice of my attorneys. And by the way, just to digress for a moment, even though Trump thinks he's being treated unfairly in these prosecutions, and people in the Republican Party who are supporters of his have said that he's being treated differently than anybody else who's ever been treated, and they point to the Manhattan indictment for Stormy Daniels as an example. The charges brought by the Manhattan District Attorney against Trump are the same as he has brought against many other people, including, just to give you a few examples, a lawyer was just accused of stealing $1.2 million from his law firm and covering it up. An insurance broker was accused of taking $350,000 from a client and covering it up. And we also had Trump, who's being accused of orchestrating a $130,000 hush money payment to a porn star and covering it up. Now, all three men were prosecuted by the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, and each faced the same felony charge, falsifying business records. So Trump is not being treated differently, and this is not a brand new charge that he's just made up for Trump. This is how these charges have existed for some time. Trump just happened to violate those charges according to the grand jury. We'll see after trial. And it brings us back, of course, continuously to what is our moral compass? Is it that everything is okay to do to accomplish your end? Because that certainly seems to be the position of the Republican Party. And those who are trying to tear down every aspect of normalcy within the criminal justice system. We have people in the House of Representatives who continue to say the FBI is no good, that DEA is no good, and everything that would be helpful to Trump, they are doing, but not looking at the long-term impact of this. If you no longer believe in judges, if you no longer believe in the system at all, in the FBI, what lies ahead for us? What indeed lies ahead? if we don't trust anything about the system. Now, I don't trust the system. I've been through the system, and it's not a good system. But there are ways to fix it without ripping it down to its foundation. I mean, we can look at the Supreme Court. That's another example of the breakdown in our moral turpitude. The ethical dilemma that's being created by the justices of the Supreme Court is, without a doubt, corruption. And yet, Justices Thomas and Alito and Roberts and Gorsuch all claim they're immune from ethical rules or simply were acting upon bad advice. Indeed, we have judges on the Supreme Court who think they're above the fray and above the rules, and they say so. Justice Alito, one of the people who was involved overturning Roe v. Wade and the gun controls that we had in this country about a year ago, he says that the Congress, this is his quote, Congress did not create the Supreme Court, the Constitution did. I know this is a controversial view, he says, but I'm willing to say it. And he says that no, quote, no provision in the Constitution gives them, meaning the Congress, the authority to regulate the Supreme Court, period, end of quote. This is really horrendous. As a lawyer, to hear a judge on the Supreme Court not know what the law is concerning. His views are not merely controversial, he's just dead wrong. Let's begin with Alito's claim that the Congress was not created by the Supreme Court, that the Congress did not create the Supreme Court. So, Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution states that the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and the lower federal courts that Congress may establish from time to time. In that sense, the Constitution calls for the creation of a Supreme Court, but it was up to the Congress to decide on its details, from everything from its budget for security and air conditioning and law clerks, as well as fundamental issues such as how many judges would be on the Supreme Court. There weren't always 9. At the beginning there was 1, then there were 3, then there were 5, then there were 7. It's been changed many times by the Congress. So indeed, the Congress does have control over the Supreme Court. Up until 1869, the Congress frequently exercises power or shrink the size of the Supreme Court. What about Alito's assertion that the Constitution does not authorize the Congress to regulate the Supreme Court? That's even more obviously incorrect. At the very least, Congress has the express constitutional power to regulate the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court under Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. So, why we have people who are willing to support constitutional experts, Jonathan Turley and others, support Alito's nonsensical approach to the operation of the Supreme Court is almost beyond belief, but they do. It goes back to the tiger and the donkey, all of this. And by the way, not that it matters because everybody talks out of both sides of their mouth in politics and apparently on the Supreme Court. In a 2018 opinion, Justice Alito cited with a favorable view the fact that the Congress has the right to control the Supreme Court and its actions. Well, that was yesterday and today's today, and Roe v. Wade 50 years ago was one expression, and now, of course, Alito and others say it doesn't matter. So, I understand the lack of trust in our system. I've had it, my own experience, but I also know that we can't have a Supreme Court, the highest judicial body in the land, acting like outlaws and just rewriting everything that has occurred in this country to their political satisfaction, not to their ethical and moral satisfaction, but to their political desires. Which is also true when we look at other leaders. And now we could branch out from Trump to talk about Giuliani. I know that Tommy, in particular, feels that the indictment against Giuliani in Georgia has been a long time coming.
A
Right,
very
Tom?
long time. I would love to ask him face to face, how does it feel to be on the other side of the 8 ball? That he put innocent working people in jail for his own pleasure. Innocent working people that worked all their lives, whatever they did, in the Fulton Fish Market, the Javits Center, and in particularly the private sanitation business, which he still has people down there investigating them. And these people are squeaky clean. Mr. Giuliani, I can't say enough about you. You're getting what you put out, believe me.
So Giuliani's another one who claims that this whole prosecution is a distortion of the system, and that, according to him, he knows more about RICO than anybody, the racketeering charge that he's facing in Georgia, and that it's improper, he says, to use it against politicians. It was meant only for, in his view, the mafia.
Organized crime.
But in the mid-1980s, when Giuliani was the U.S. attorney in the Manhattan District U.S. Attorney's Office, he said this: "Throughout our history, the principle that no person is above or beyond the law has been etched into the foundation of our legal system." End of quote. Now, I want to point out that indeed he did use the charge RICO against people who were involved in politics. Indeed, he charged Fernand and Imelda Marcos, the leaders of the Philippines, with falsely reporting their tax income. And he used RICO to bring the charges. Well, we'll come back to Rudy in a minute, but I always am reminded of my own involvement with Rudy, and we'll talk about that when we come back after the break. 914-636-0110.